Tariffs are absolutely necessary if we're going to defeat globalism, but we do know that they come at a price. They come at a cost. We have to understand that up front, and I think President Trump and his team have done a very good job of communicating that. For those who aren't aware, I used to be a free trade absolutist, and it was in around 2017, 2018 when I started questioning. I started wondering why aren't the crises happening as President Trump in his first term started rolling out tariffs? And I started digging deeper into it and started trying to figure out how could these mostly Austrian economists, how could they be wrong? The answer is that they weren't wrong. Okay, free market really is the best way. What they didn't know at the time when they came up with their theories, their concepts, their ideology, they had no inkling about full-blown modern-day globalism, especially corporate globalism, which we'll be discussing a bit today. It's a topic that, frankly, everybody avoids. I've avoided it multiple times because when we're talking about tariffs, there are certain arguments in favor of tariffs that are very straightforward, easy to understand, 10 seconds to explain. When you start getting into the corporate redistribution of wealth on an international level, and when you start getting into the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of how this operates and why tariffs can work to oppose this globalism, that's more of a 10 or 15 minute conversation. At the very least, you could do an entire college course on it, and I'm sure somebody has. So when given the option of, okay, somebody, why do you approve tariffs? Well, because, sit down, grab a coffee, let me explain. No, it's easy to just say, because our economy, we will be able to generate a great deal of revenue to the point of, if it's done right, we might be able to go back to the old days when tariffs were the primary source of income for the U.S. government and we didn't even have an income tax. Okay, that's an easy argument to make, as is, from when you're talking about negotiating with the largest consumer nation in the world. We are the largest consumer nation, so as a negotiating tool, tariffs can work wonders when it comes to negotiating with foreign interests, foreign nations. Our foreign affairs, our foreign policy can be shaped very favorably for us with the use of tariffs. Very easy to understand. And there's the argument about localization. Hey, we need to bring jobs back to America. We need to have manufacturing in America. We need to use American products, use American materials, use American resources, keep the flow of money, the cycle of money here in the United States. That all makes sense, and it's very easy to communicate. But once you start getting into the fight against corporate globalism and globalism in general, now all of a sudden it's like, all right, let's get comfortable, sit with me as we discuss how tariffs fight globalism. But then this article was sent to me by via Brandon Smith over at alt-market.us. We have it posted over at americafirstreport.com. I'm not going to read the entire article. It's a long article, but I'm going to read highlights from it. And I encourage you to go to americafirstreport.com and to read the article in its fullness, because it is important and it's very informative. If he can write an article about it, certainly in considering the timeliness of the issue, I should be able to do at least one segment of a show about it. So skipping ahead, and this is in reference to the Austrian economists who were pushing for basically the libertarian form of free market trade, tariff-free trade. They missed something. And it's not their fault. It wasn't around at the time, So Adam Smith might have witnessed the corruption of mercantilism, but he had no inkling of the monstrosity of modern globalism and how it would ultimately pervert the free market ideal. The same goes for Mises. Their support for global trade was contingent on the idea that government interference is always the root problem, the fly in the ointment. And at the time, it was. They did not take into account the blurring of lines between corporations, governments, and NGOs. They did not consider the corporate shadow government of Davos and the manipulation of markets in the name of, quote-unquote, free trade. They couldn't have even fathomed the creation of organizations like the IMF, World Bank, the BIS, etc., etc., etc. At the time, they came up with their economic theories. That's true. You can, and again, I'm saying this because we have to understand that even though I am a huge proponent of looking to the past and honoring and appreciating and abiding by the wisdom of those, for example, our founding fathers. I am an originalist when it comes to the Constitution. I'm not suggesting that, we need to get rid of all the anytime I say I'm an originalist, so you oppose the amendments. No, that's not what I'm saying. But the original intent of every aspect of the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, including the future amendments, the original intent should be used to determine our current course. Just because we're in a different time now, because there's technology, the challenge we have today is that we think way too highly of ourselves, at least some of us do, think way too highly of ourselves and our modern day sensibilities as if they're somehow better than the sensibilities of what I believe to be a more honorable set of Americans during the founding of this nation. But I digress. Let's keep going with the article. Jumping way ahead, these corporations also act as wealth siphons, sucking up consumer cash in one country only to deposit it in other countries instead of cycling the wealth, after they're cut, of course, cycling the wealth back into the economy they rely on for sales. In other words, global corporations act as a kind of wealth redistribution machine that takes money and jobs from Americans and spreads them around the world to the detriment of the American public. As the middlemen of this wealth redistribution scheme, companies generate vast profits while people on both sides of the exchange get very little in return. Mexico might seem like it benefits from the NAFTA trade imbalances, but this is a mistake. The Mexican people and their standard of living enjoy minimal benefits. The companies that use them for labor get the advantage, along with some government officials who are on the take. Now, I would argue something that's not mentioned here, as he's basically describing the corporate-driven international redistribution of wealth that greatly impacts the United States and the people of the United States and the businesses and everything that is American. This is to our detriment when they get engaged in this international redistribution of wealth scheme. But here's the hard part for us to understand. Not understand. How should I say this? We look at globalism as evil, and it is. But not all people that are participating in the globalism or advancing it are necessarily evil or even working on evil intentions. For example, if you can take a company, I'll pick a company out here in a second, but you take an American company that is shipping jobs and they're getting all their resources, they're getting a bunch of stuff from outside. They're not sitting there thinking, okay, how are we going to screw over the American people? They're sitting there thinking that based upon the rules of the game as they're being presented to us today, the best thing for our shareholders and for our company is to partake in these practices. In other words, they're not doing it with malice in their hearts. They're doing it with survival of their company, with advancement and profits of their company at heart. Now, I'm not trying to justify that. I myself, as owner of multiple companies through the years, I've never, ever outsourced in any way offshore. I've never imported. Okay, even our beef company. I mean, would it be cheaper to import beef? You betcha. That's why the vast majority of companies do. But we don't. We get our beef from Texas. Crazy, right? Born and raised in the great state of Texas. Is it more expensive? Yes. But we choose not to. But I could understand. I'm not going to, I will fault other companies that do import beef and then slap a product of USA label disingenuously on their products because they're allowed to do that. Discussion for another day. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can't say, oh my gosh, because they're engaged in that, they're evil. For example, Ford Motor Company. Okay, when you think of Ford, most people would think, maybe you might think of a Mustang. A lot of people, maybe most people would think of the Ford F-150. It's an icon. It's an American. It's America on four wheels, basically, right? Unless you're a Chevy fan or a Ram fan. then it might be evil. But for a lot of Americans, the Ford F-150 represents true Americanism, except that only 32% of it is actually built here in the United States. Most of it is produced elsewhere. Why? Because it makes sense financially for the company to have, for example, engines built in Mexico, to import steel and other aluminum and other materials from other nations versus buying them here. 32% of the F-150 is truly made in America. Now, they are assembled in America, so we got that. Ford is trying. But I would argue, I would almost guarantee, if they thought they could get away with having it completely built in Mexico, they probably would. This is where the tariffs come into play. This is the obvious way. Okay, and again, I'm back to Ford. I'm not suggesting that they're doing it out of evil. Okay, they're doing it because that's what makes the most financial sense, because the rules of the game are stacked in favor of globalism, in favor of this international redistribution of wealth scam that has plagued mostly our nation. It's not just, we can say it's plagued the world, but really many in the world, at least the globalists and their cronies, they have benefited from it. We have not. You have not. I have not. Not nearly enough. The detriments far outweigh any of the benefits of this international. Basically, it's a siphoning scheme, a money laundering scheme, a redistribution of wealth scheme. Taking our dollars, we pay for it, and in an ideal world, we buy a truck, and the money was our money that was used to pay for that truck. Some of it goes to the dealership, some of it goes to the salespeople and the staff, some of it goes to corporate, but a lot of it is then reinvested into Americans building American things with American equipment, American materials, American everything. And then it's a cycle. Then it's like, hey, this works. But it doesn't. Because the rules that are dictated by the central banks, the rules that are dictated by IMF, World Bank, United Nations, various trade agreements, free trade agreements, the people at Davos, the people at Bilderberger groups. I mean, pick your globalist entity, and they all have at least a little bit of a hand in this. Not only are they taken from the cookie jar, but they're also helping to write the rules, and they're not using Joe Biden's auto pen. Let's get back to the next important segment of this particular article. Let's see, here we go. International economic independency is a form of slavery, especially when corporations and NGO middlemen are involved. Only resource redundancy and localism foster true free markets and individual liberty. Tariffs can help to energize local production and trade and make communities more self-reliant. That said, there's going to be a cost. In other words, yes, it is very much easier and less expensive for us to go to Amazon and order some cheap product that was made in China, distributed through Switzerland, and filtered through Canada until it hits our shelves at Walmart or Amazon or whatever. There will be pain to try to duplicate the necessary items. I'm not talking about the frivolous items. I'm talking about necessary items. For example, pharmaceuticals. It will make drug prices go up if and when we do start producing our own pharmaceuticals instead of being reliant on 90% of our pharmaceutical ingredients coming from communist China. But it must be done. It must be done. Because this is unsustainable. At some point, they are going to pull the rug out from under us. And we are going to be in trouble. Just saying. I think this is the last. No, it's got two more. Back to the article. Hoover was blamed for exacerbating the Great Depression in 1930 with his Smoot-Hawley tariffs. In truth, the Great Depression spread because of a series of policy decisions by major banks and rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, which former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke admitted to openly in 2002. At the time, it didn't matter who caused it. Hoover was the president, so he was going to be the scapegoat. The same situation could happen for Trump if he's not careful. And all conservatives, you and me, we will be blamed by extension. It's important to remember that U.S. production has been hollowed out by decades of government interference supporting globalization, along with unchallenged corporate power. Reining in corporations with tariffs is not going to be enough. There must also be incentives to reverse the damage done by decades of government corruption. I can't think of any other way to rebuild America's production base fast enough to counter the price increases that will inevitably come with tariffs. Defeating inflation would require an unprecedented national effort to bring back manufacturing specifically for necessities, such as the aforementioned pharmaceuticals. Tariffs by themselves are not going to make this happen. And let's look at the pharmaceutical example as our example. Pardon me. I said that if we were to start to bring back production of pharmaceuticals to the United States instead of being so dependent, we are dependent on China. If anything were to really go south with China, Americans would die. Not because of nuclear weapons. They wouldn't have to launch anything. They would die because we have become dependent on the drugs that they supply. We don't have a backup plan. And if we were to start to, and we should, start to wean ourselves from them, that will cause an increase in pricing for many pharmaceuticals. It will be incumbent on us to push forward as quickly as possible. Sort of like ripping off a Band-Aid, right? We see the problem. We appreciate the problem. We understand that there's a problem here. Anybody can see that. If 90% of our pharmaceutical ingredients are coming from communist China, you should recognize that that's probably not a good thing. Probably pretty risky, especially considering the geopolitical turmoil that is brewing surrounding China, the United States, and really the entire world. It would make sense for us to be able to, treat our own American citizens with stuff from America. We have to make that happen. There will be a period of pain because of the increased prices of those drugs. But here's the thing. If we go beyond just tariffs, if we were to go full-blown, wholeheartedly embrace the idea of generating our own, of collecting our own resources and our own ingredients and our own supplies and making everything here as much as possible, the pain, I believe, would be short-lived. Let's get back to this article. I think this is the last one. In the meantime, individual citizens and communities are going to have to prepare as globalism breaks down. This means local production of goods, retailers seeking out local suppliers, people trading goods and services through barter networks, etc., etc., etc. State leaders should consider introducing commodity-backed scrip to offset any potential damage to the dollar. Not a bad idea, and it is already in the works in many states. They should also open up more natural resources to improve local industries. There's a lot that we can do. But the best thing that you can do, all this is policy stuff, and that's the other reason, by the way, that I've decided on multiple occasions not to go into detail about this particular subject, simply because what can we do about it as individuals? Well, number one, we can definitely try to reduce the pressure, because there will be pressure. There already is pressure on President Trump as it pertains to the tariffs. We need to, he does listen to the people, and we need to make sure that there are fewer people trying to scream at him or protest him or scream in his ear or scream at his people or burn down Tesla dealerships or whatever stupid things that they do. We need to reduce that, and that's in part by trying to educate as many people as possible. I would encourage you to find this article over at AmericaFirstReport.com and to send it to friends, send it to relatives, send it to anybody who needs to hear this information. Number two, of course, we should definitely, and I should have put this as number one because it is the most important thing, but we do need to pray as Bible-believing Christians. If you are, if you're not, we can talk about that some other time soon. But if you are a Bible-believing Christian, pray that we as a nation can be protected. Daniel prayed for the protection and the redemption of his nation. Why can't we do the same? I think we should, especially considering the multiple threats that surround us. Electing President Trump was a wonderful, wonderful thing, but the work isn't done. We still have to fight harder. And the most important thing that we can do as individuals and as families and even to some extent, if you have the resources, as communities, is to go ahead and engage in as much of this localization as possible. At the very least, it used to be common for you youngsters out there back in the 80s and 90s. It was pretty common for you to say, hey, shouldn't you be buying American? Now today it's like, oh my gosh, this was made in America. That's fascist. Oh, we should be buying from Canada. I actually heard somebody say that. Vermont maple syrup. No, you should get the Canadian maple syrup. Anyway, there was a time in the not too distant past when buying American was actually the cool thing to do. We need to try to bring that back as best as we can as individuals. I'm not saying try to force people to. If you can prompt people to, that'd be great. But I definitely like to buy American. I have actually almost thrown away my coffee cup. And when I find more coffee cups that are made in America, this is a really good one. It's a really good one. It keeps my coffee hot for a very long time. It keeps it at the perfect temperature. But be conscious of it. If you want to be an absolutist, awesome. More power to you. If you want to be trying like I do, awesome. That's good enough. Maybe not good enough, but that's good too. But no matter what, localize yourself. Make sure that you are not beholden to anybody. Nobody at all. Okay? Self-reliance should be everything. I'm not saying that you have to go become a hermit, but you shouldn't be in deep trouble if there's a run on food at the grocery stores. You shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, my family's going to die soon. We're going to have to call on FEMA to save us because we don't have any extra backup food. We don't have any, many gallons of potable water stored. We don't have guns, ammunition, Bibles, all the various things, meds, long-term storage meds. These are all important things. And I would encourage you, I'm not going to turn this into a pitch, but you can find some very good companies that can help you with multiple things by going to my sponsor page, jdrucker.com/find. It's not just my sponsors. It's got everything. It's got my socials, my shows, my websites, stuff like that. But it does scroll down to the bottom. You'll see some great sponsors to get you long-term storage food or long-term storage, meds or gold or crypto or whatever. So check that out, jdrucker.com/find. We have to do more than just sit back and hope that President Trump is able to make these tariffs work. We have to hold a lot of people at bay because there's going to be complaints. We saw what happened when it was very blatantly obvious why the cost of eggs were going up. But every legacy media outlet, every leftist, every Democrat, and many rhinos were screaming about, oh my gosh, Trump's eggs. It's Trump's eggs. Look how it's $8. Are you kidding me? It's Trump. Okay, we knew it was because of the culling of flocks as a result of the so-called bird flu. But they didn't want to highlight that. They didn't want to highlight the increase in pricing throughout the entirety of the Biden regime. Okay, and not enough people are listening to Carolyn Leavitt as she's trying to make that argument. So it's up to us to remind people, because corporate media is not talking about the recent dip in egg prices, not at all. They're suddenly, oh my gosh, let's move on to another subject. We talked about eggs all last week. Egg prices are going down. Oh well, is Joe Biden back in office or something? That must be the case because egg prices are going down, and they were Trump's egg prices that were going up. If you're not watching the screen, I am definitely literally physically rolling my eyes. It's not all bad, folks. I don't want to be doom and gloom here, but we do have to do our part. Can't just sit back and hope that President Trump fixes it all. This is your nation. This is my nation. This is our nation. We have to do what we can to preserve the United States of America. If there's one thing that people who are brand new to prepping often forget, it's the long-term storage meds. I think a lot of times people either forget them or they don't realize that they can acquire medications that can be held for an extended period of time. My good friends over at Jace Medical, they've got you covered, whether it's for chronic meds for illnesses that you or your family members have, whether it's antibiotics, just being ready for whatever's going to happen in the world, these are things that you should have available to you if you're going to be preparing for self-reliance in the long haul. Go to jdrucker.com/meds, jdrucker.com/meds. Use promo code Rucker10, the number 10, Rucker10 at checkout, and you get a nice discount on top of that. jdrucker.com/meds.